Good evening, everyone. Time for this week's silver update. We've got a nice little breakout on the open today. We're at 35.68. So we're holding nicely in the uptrending pattern. The MACD is nicely reset and just now ticking to the upside. So hopefully this will be one of our typical moves with the MACD as we move in the bull market and continue on up. I see it's printing 35.73 right now, so we'll move close in. Very strong, very healthy. I expected this just because we had a very short deflation scare with the Japanese thing, and the central bank intervention seems to indicate that there's not going to be any let up in the printing of money. QE3 probably is a done deal, and the Fed will find reason to continue on. The QE2 is projected to end in June of this year, but with all of the damage in Japan and with the central bank responses that we've seen, we're most likely to get more money printing as a result. So you can see we're going to be testing fairly soon. We're going to be testing the upper band of this line, 3650 to 3675 roughly is the high. If we make it through there, hopefully we'll get a run to 40. Of course, no one can say for sure, and that's just speculation. As I pointed out in the last update, it's a bull market and you have to go with the trend. So I wanted to read a little bit more from Livermore, and he's going to address a topic that I think is always relevant. He's going to talk about tip taking and tip takers. Also going to read a little story about fundamental analysis. So tip takers are those who want to be told what to do, and that's not really the purpose of the updates that I do. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm trying to educate you on how you can decide yourself what you should do. It's pretty much a useless thing to tell you now's the time to do this, now's the time to do that, because then when are you going to know when to sell? If I tell you to buy, how are you going to know when to sell? So the goal is to become educated yourself as to technicals and as to fundamentals so that you can make up your own mind as to when to act. Now, I've said before, the fundamentals are the reason why you do what you do, and the technicals show you when to do what you do. We're in a bull market. The fundamentals tell us to buy. The technicals will hopefully tell us when the dips occur. So we know we're in a bull market and we want to buy. We're looking for the technicals to give us an entry point. And with that, let me segue into some more Livermore. I sometimes think that tip takers are like drunkards. There are some who can't resist the craving and always look forward to those jags which they consider indispensable to their happiness. It's so easy to open your ears and let the tip in, to be told precisely what to do to be happy in such a manner that you can easily obey is the next nicest thing to being happy, which is a mighty long first step toward the fulfillment of your heart's desire. It is not so much greed made blind by eagerness as it is hope bandaged by the unwillingness to do any thinking. And it is not only among the outside public that you find inveterate tip takers. The professional trader on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange is quite as bad. I am definitely aware that no end of them cherish mistaken notions of me because I never gave anybody tips. If I told the average man, sell yourself 5,000 steel, he would do it on the spot. But if I tell him I'm quite bearish on the entire market and gave him my reasons in detail, he finds troubling in listening, and after I'm done talking, he will glare at me for wasting his time expressing my views on general conditions instead of giving him a direct and specific tip. Like a real philanthropist of the type that is so abundant in Wall Street, the sort who loves to put millions into the pockets of friends, acquaintances, and utter strangers alike. The belief in miracles that all men cherish is born of immoderate indulgence in hope. There are people who go on hope sprees periodically, and we all know the chronic hope drunkard that is held up before us as an exemplary optimist. Tip takers are all they really are. I have an acquaintance, a member of the New York Stock Exchange, who was one of those who thought I was a selfish, cold-blooded pig because I never gave tips or put friends into things. One day, this was some years ago, he was talking to a newspaper man who casually mentioned that he had it from a good source that GOH was going up. My broker friend promptly bought 1,000 shares and saw the price decline so quickly that he was out $3,500 before he could stop his loss. He met the newspaper man a day or two later while he was still sore. "That was a hell of a tip you gave me," he complained. "What tip was that?" asked the reporter, who did not remember. "About GOH. You said you had it from a good source." "So I did. A director of the company, who is a member of the finance committee, told me." "Which of them was it?" asked the broker vindictively. "If you must know," answered the newspaper man, "it was your own father-in-law, Mr. Westlake." "Why in Hades didn't you tell me you meant him?" yelled the broker. "You cost me $3,500. He didn't believe in family tips. The further away the source, the purer the tip. Old Westlake was a rich and successful banker and promoter. He ran across John W. Gates one day. Gates asked him what he knew. "If you will act on it, I will give you a tip. If you won't, I'll save my breath," answered old Westlake grumpily. "Of course I'll act on it," promised Gates cheerfully. "Sell reading. There's a sure 25 points in it, and possibly more, but 25 absolutely certain," said Westlake impressively. "I'm much obliged to you, and bet you $1,000,000 Gates shook hands warmly and went away in the direction of his broker's office. Westlake had specialized on reading. He knew all about the company and stood in with the insiders, so that the market for the stock was an open book to him, and everybody knew it. Now he was advising the Western Plunger to go short of it. Well, reading never stopped going up. It rose something like 100 points in a few weeks. One day old Westlake ran smack up against John W. on the street, but he made out like he hadn't seen him and was walking on. John W. Gates caught up with him, his face all smiles, and held out his hand. Old Westlake shook it dazedly. "I want to thank you for that tip you gave me on reading," said Gates. "I didn't give you any tip," said Westlake, frowning. "Sure you did, and it was a Jim Hickey of a tip, too. I made $60,000. "Made $60,000? "Sure. Don't you remember? You told me to sell reading, so I bought it." "I've always made money coppering your tips, Westlake," said John W. Gates pleasantly. "Always." Old Westlake looked at the bluff Westerner and presently remarked admiringly, "Gates, what a rich man I'd be if I had your brains." Now there's a few more stories on tips and tip takers, tip givers, and what a sucker's game it is, and of course how the rich use those to sucker the public and the public is inveterate tip takers. It's kind of like it's in their nature, and they just really want to be told what to do, and there's no shortage of Wall Street advisors to tell them what to do. So that's a story on tips. Now he does another story here on fundamental analysis, and this is kind of a unique, interesting one on a man thinking for himself, fundamental wise. So this is a very entertaining story as well. Livermore says, investors are a different breed of cats. Most of them go in for strong for inventories and statistics of earnings and all sorts of mathematical data, as though that meant facts and certainties. The human factor is minimized as a rule. Very few people like to buy into a one-man business, but the wisest investor I ever knew was a man who began by being a Pennsylvania Dutchman and followed it up by coming to Wall Street and seeing a great deal of Russell Sage. He was a great investigator, an indefatigable Missourian. He believed in asking his own questions and in doing his seeing with his own eyes. He had no use for other men's spectacles. This was years ago. It seems he held quite a little Aitchison. I think that's a railroad. Presently, he began to hear disquieting reports about the company and its management. He was told that Mr. Reinhardt, the president, instead of being the marvel he was credited with being, in reality was a most extravagant manager whose recklessness was fast pushing the company into a mess. There would be the deuce to pay on the inevitable day of reckoning. This was precisely the kind of news that was as the breath of life to the Pennsylvania Dutchman. He hurried over to Boston to interview Mr. Reinhardt and to ask him a few questions. The questions consisted of repeating the accusations he had heard and then asking the president of Aitchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad if they were true. Mr. Reinhardt not only denied the allegations emphatically, but said even more. He proceeded to prove by figures that the alligators were malicious liars. The Pennsylvania Dutchman had asked for exact information, and the president gave it to him, showing him what the company was doing and how it stood financially to a cent. The Pennsylvania Dutchman thanked President Reinhardt, returned to New York, and promptly sold all his Aitchison holdings. A week or so later, he used his idle funds to buy a big lot of Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. That's another railroad. Years afterward, we were talking of lucky swaps, and he cited his own case. He explained what prompted him to make it. You see, he said, I noticed that President Reinhardt, when he wrote down figures, took sheets of letter paper from a pigeonhole in his mahogany roll-top desk. It was fine, heavy linen paper with beautifully engraved letterheads in 2 colors. It was not only very expensive, but worse, it was unnecessarily expensive. He would write a few figures on a sheet to show me exactly what the company was earning on certain divisions, or to prove how they were cutting down expenses or reducing operating costs, and then he would crumple up the sheet of expensive paper and throw it in the wastebasket. Pretty soon, he would want to impress me with the economies they were introducing, and he would reach for a fresh sheet of the beautiful note paper with the engraved letterheads in 2 colors. A few figures and bingo, into the wastebasket. More money wasted without a thought. It struck me that if the president was that kind of a man, that he would scarcely be likely to insist upon having or rewarding economical assistance. I didn't read that right, but basically he's saying that if he's the kind of guy that would waste that type of paper, he wouldn't be likely to hire economical and prudent employees as well. I therefore decided to believe the people who had told me the management was extravagant instead of accepting the president's version, and I sold what Aitchison stock I held. It so happened that I had occasion to go to the offices of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western a few days later. Old Sam Sloan was the president. His office was the nearest to the entrance, and his door was wide open. It was always open. Nobody could walk into the general offices of the DL&W in those days and not see the president of the company seated at his desk. Any man could walk in and do business with him right off if he had any business to do. The financial reporters used to tell me that they never had to beat about the bush with old Sam Sloan, but would ask their questions and get a straight yes or no from him, no matter what the stock market exigencies of the other directors might be. When I walked in, I saw the old man was busy. I thought at first he was opening his mail, but after I got inside, close to the desk, I saw what he was doing. I learned afterwards that it was his daily custom to do it. After the mail was sorted and opened, instead of throwing away the empty envelopes, he had them gathered up and taken to his office. In his leisure moments, he would rip the envelope all around. That gave him 2 bits of paper, each with one clean blank side. He would pile these up, and then he would have them distributed about to be used in lieu of scratch pads for such figuring as Reinhardt had done for me on the engraved paper notes. No waste of empty envelopes, no waste of the president's idle moments. Everything utilized. It struck me that if that was the kind of man the DL&W had for president, the company was managed economically in all departments. The president would see to that. Of course, I knew the company was paying regular dividends and had a good property. I bought all the DL&W stock I could. Since that time, the capital stock has been doubled and quadrupled. My annual dividends amount to as much as my original investment. I still have my DL&W, and Aitchison went into the hands of a receiver a few months after I saw the president throwing sheet after sheet of linen paper with engraved letterhead in 2 colors into the wastebasket to prove to me with figures that he was not extravagant. And the beauty of that story is that it is true, and that no other stock the Pennsylvania Dutchman could have bought would have proved to be so good an investment as the DL&W. So there's a couple of fantastic stories from Livermore. Like I said, the greatest trader who's ever lived. And the first one demonstrates his absolute disgust with tip-taking and tip-giving. He can't stand it. And he was an honest man. He had his faults, but his money was honestly made through trading using his own mind, and he's definitely one to learn from. The last story just shows you that there is a price to pay for extravagance and waste. I think the United States is going to learn that lesson fairly soon. We're seeing with the price of silver that silver is responding to the money printers. I don't think they have any intent of slowing down. And ultimately, it's going to be a very bullish thing for all real assets. Gold, silver, probably even farmland and real estate, and even oil, etc. So the fundamentals are still very strong. The technicals are still very strong. It's a bull market, and it's time to buy more anytime we get a dip. But we're looking for new highs now, and we'll probably get new highs either tonight or tomorrow or the next day, and we're on the way to 40 next. So we'll talk to you next time.